My name is Lindsay Reaves. I live and work on this 672-acre working tree farm with my husband, Tom Bauman. We've been living here on the tree farm, and I've started learning about forestry for the last 12 years. I don't have a background in forestry, but when you live and work on a tree farm, you learn things pretty quickly.
My name is Tom Bauman. I'm a third-generation tree farmer. This forest land's been in our family for 75 years now. My goals right now are to try and keep the forest healthy as much as I can. And that's becoming more and more of a challenge with our weather getting very droughty and staying that way. So I'm mostly chasing trees that are dying, trying to keep the beetle infestations down as much as possible. We've got another operator that's gone through a fair number of acres, thinning it out, trying to reduce the stand density in hopes that that might somehow reduce mortality rate. But that's the big experiment we're going to find out pretty soon.
Another important goal for me as a timber owner is looking at the diversity of the forest and the wildlife habitat that we need, so that we have places for the birds that really thrive on more open areas, and the edges that we create for species that need places to forage and nest and to hunt. We have quite a bit of habitat on this tree farm, and so I like to, with our trail cams, see where the animals are at and make our forest management decisions, especially around timber harvesting. If we know there's some nesting sites going on, we will not do forest operations in that area till we know that the animals have moved on. And then just overall documenting the disturbances that have been happening over the last few years. So the ice storms, the snowstorms, the drought, where the trees most stressed, what kind of sites and aspects are on this tree farm that really support harvest operations or maybe don't support harvest operations. And literally every day is just what do we need to do today to keep the forest healthy, to make a living harvesting the timber, and make sure that we leave this land in a better place than we found it. With a working tree farm, every year we're looking at how much timber do we have to take out to meet our financial needs. And right now we are basically chasing dead and dying trees, because with the drought conditions, we've got a lot of bug beetle infestations. We really want to get those trees out of the forest so that it keeps the bug population as minimized as possible. And all of these trees right now were dead. And so we have about a small window, because they will start to develop rot, and the mills will not want that because it doesn't make a good 2x4 or piece of plywood. So for the last literally 4 years, what we have been doing with ice storms, snowstorms, and the bug beetle infestation is working the forest, getting the trees off the land to the mills, and then going in and doing some reforestation with some incense cedars that are more drought tolerant.
My name's Lauren Grand, and I'm the Oregon State University Extension Forestry Agent that serves Lane County. I work with small woodland owners, natural resource professionals, and the general public to learn more about forest ecology and forest management. And I often put on classes and workshops for those folks so that they can see things firsthand when learning about forest ecology or management practices. One of the effects of climate change on our forests is an increase in beetle infestations into the trees. What I have here is a piece of bark from a Douglas-fir tree that shows the incidence of Douglas-fir beetle that has helped to kill this tree. So you know it's Douglas-fir beetle by the type of gallery that you see under the bark. We have a thick main gallery with a nuptial chamber here, and then smaller galleries that come out of the sides where the young beetles are feeding before they leave the tree to go attack other trees. Douglas-fir beetle is mostly a secondary killer, which means that when the tree's already stressed out, the beetles sense that, and then they go after the tree to take advantage of that stress and ultimately kill the tree. However, it can be a primary killer as well. So if there are beetles in the area and there's no more stressed trees around, then the increase of beetles in the area can go after healthy trees and kill those as well. So with a higher incidence of stressed trees as a result of climate change, we're seeing higher numbers of Douglas-fir beetles that are going after those stressed trees, which means there's more beetles in the area to go after healthy trees as well if they run out of stressed trees to kill. Normally, Douglas-fir beetle isn't a huge concern because Douglas-fir beetles are native to our area and they evolved with Douglas-fir trees. So Douglas-fir trees have natural defenses against the beetle. As a result of climate change, however, with the hotter and drier summers that we've been having, there's less water available for Douglas-fir trees to use that natural defense that they have against the insects. So they aren't able to defend themselves as readily. Now these beetles are maybe about the size of a grain of rice, and Douglas-fir trees are gigantic. So how can that little beetle hurt these trees? Well, what happens is when the tree's stressed out, they put out a pheromone, and the beetles can sense that pheromone. And so the beetles that are flying through the woods can smell that and say, this tree is stressed out and I'm gonna try and enter it. And so when one beetle gets in, they put out an aggregation pheromone that tells all of its beetles' friends to say, hey, come join me in this tree. And you can see a lot of them can join in that tree. In this one piece of bark, there's 4 galleries. And so you can just imagine how many beetles can enter a tree at one time. Now, the beetles are all entering that tree because now it doesn't have any water to defend itself to push those beetles out. And they're having a party in there, a mating party. And they all get together and they meet in their nuptial chambers and they mate. When there's no room left in that tree, then they'll put out an anti-aggregate pheromone that says there's no vacancy, keep flying and find another tree. And so they'll mate in that tree and then they'll lay the male dies and then the female lays the eggs through that gallery. And what happens is the baby beetles hatch and then eat through the tunnels sideways through the summer and then get ready to fly the next year.
So we're now up on the North Ridge. This is the highest part of our property and also a part that I've really noticed over the probably the last 6 years of reforestation and the challenges that we've had with the droughty conditions. There's a lot of wind that happens up here. So when we did a final harvest, forest practice rules requires us to reforest and to reforest a certain number of trees. So we planted Doug-fir because that's the tree of choice for a working tree farm. That's what the mills really want for the structural integrity of the tree. But the trees just weren't making it. There's also a lot of trees up here like the oaks and the madrones. So what that tells us is that the soil is not as fertile as it would be in some of the other areas of the tree farm. We had to get the trees, the forest back into trees, and so one of our management decisions changed looking at the climate and the heat that happens up here and the lack of rain to planting incense cedars. And the incense cedars are literally thriving. So what we look at when we're looking at a forest management plan for our tree farm is how can we make sure that we meet our objectives for both timber, for habitat, for wildlife diversity, and if the trees are not thriving and growing and we have continued bug beetle infestation, we really have to take a look at how are we going to manage the tree farm differently. So we bring in different tree species. What's great for us is that we live on this tree farm, and so we're able to, over the months and the years, see the kind of disturbances that are starting to happen. And the biggest management change in my understanding that we've made is diversifying the tree farm with other tree species so that we're not just a single Douglas-fir tree farm, but we have the incense cedars, we have the Willamette Valley ponderosa pines, we have some redwoods, and also really assessing the sites like this one that there's really a lot of the oaks and knowing the soil so that we're not trying to come in and do something that's not conducive to the landscape. We also are really monitoring how much water we have on the tree farm and trying to be mindful about, are there maybe areas that we really need to just let nature, if you will, do its course. We're still meeting the forest practice rules, but really trying to work with the landscape and especially with the changing temperatures and lack of rainfall that we're having.
So when you're deciding what trees to plant in a certain area, normally trees really all want good, deep, moist soil, access to sunlight, and access to water and nutrients. But there's just some trees that do better in drier conditions and some trees that do better in wetter conditions. The reason why we have that situation is what's called competitive advantage. So trees all want the same things, but you see different types of trees in different areas. And the reason for that is because they have different adaptations to be able to live under different conditions. So some trees are more drought tolerant and some trees are more shade tolerant. And so having that adaptation allows them to outcompete trees without it to be able to do well in a certain situation.
So we are in Coyote Creek, which is our small fish stream here on the tree farm. It's spring fed, so it runs year round. And what I've really noticed specifically over the last 5 years with the drought conditions we've been having is the creek level is minimal, which has a lot of challenges for us as tree farm owners. One, and maybe most importantly this time of the year, is we do not have access to water for our water tender and the fire trucks. So if we had a fire, we are relying only on the water that we had collected earlier in the winter that we fill up with. The other concern I have with the climate change we've been having is, as I mentioned, this is a small fish stream. But if you looked at the water flow right now, it's not conducive for fish. And so that has just implications both for the health of the stream, the other animals and insects that utilize this as an ecosystem. And on a personal note, this is how we also get our water for our house, because we are right next to a spring, and so we have a holding tank. And for the last 5 years, usually around July, August, we completely lose our water source for our drinking water. So we've talked about forest management objectives, and one of the management objectives that I have taken on personally is really helping the public to understand what we do in general as forest managers. That yes, we cut down trees, we plant trees, we honor the resources that we have on the land with animals and water, and we are the headwaters of this Longtom watershed. We are one of many forest land owners that really take into account that this is the beginning of the watershed. I really like to use the land and the creek especially to really educate youth about the resources that we have and the importance that we take, whether we're a small woodland owner who are managing the tree farm for the timber resources, or a small woodland owner who just wants to live in the woods, that we still have to follow the same rules and regulations that we would expect of our industrial partners. And specifically on Coyote Creek, we have setbacks that we cannot log into the creek because, again, we want to protect this natural resource so that everybody downstream has the same water quality that we have here at the very beginning of the watershed. I love doing tours on the tree farm because it really brings people into the landscape and has a lot of opportunity to help folks understand what we do as forest managers. When I bring on university students, one of my favorite audiences, oftentimes at the end of the tour, we ask, any ending takeaways? And almost to a T, the students say two things. One, I had no idea, and then fill in that blank. I had no idea how complex it was. I had no idea how much you guys cared about your land. And then the other piece that people are struck by is they come onto a working tree farm, and I think their expectation is to see a final harvest clear cut and see it as ugly. The second thing people always say is how beautiful this land is. And I take that as a really, kind of prideful compliment because we do care about our land, we do care about the ecosystem. And so the whole ecosystem of a working tree farm is something I love sharing with people because we don't see that when we're just driving by from the highway.